Hey, hey. Good morning, Sadiq. Sadiq, can you hear me? If you're talking, you're on mute. I don't know if my audio's not coming through, but okay, cool. We're gonna give it few more a few more minutes and then we'll get started. Okay. I'm gonna drop a quick notification. Good morning. Robinson, can you hear me?
Yeah, I can hear you. Can you hear me?
Yes, sir. Good morning.
Okay. Good morning.
We're gonna give it like, maybe 2 more minutes and get started. I know some people probably can't make it, so a
Mm.
lot of people usually watch the recording and let me know if they have any questions. Um,
Yeah,
but
me too. I gotta leave in about an hour, but I wanted to jump on for about an hour.
cool, cool, yeah, that'll be cool because I guess the most important part will be in that first half, and then we'll go over some of the typical course stuff later on after that hour. So,
Okay.
all
Cool.
right. Well, what I'll do is let me throw a quick um, message in the chat. Get started now. Okay. All right. Hey, Noodle Don. Can you hear me okay? Just making sure audio's coming through. All right, GM. Nice. All right, I think we have a decent quorum to go ahead and get started. Because if anyone can't make it to this session, then we know we have the recording online. Hey, Brian. GM. Okay, so let me make sure everything. Can you all see this slideshow that I'm sharing?
Yep. Yes, I can see it.
All right, perfect. All right, so actually, that is a typo. Around session 4. Okay, y'all. So yeah, just a disclaimer. Everyone knows that I record this session, so this will be online and posted later. It's currently on. We're currently streaming right now online. So if you have that, if you have any questions, I'll have the recording for you afterwards. All right, so we're gonna kick off session 4 today. As you can probably tell, Robert and I switch out on some of these depending on how things going for that weekend. As you all know, he just got back from a vacation. He's not feeling too well, so I'll be leading this session today. And if you have any questions, Robert will be able to answer any offline during the week. All right, so for this session today, we're going to do something a little interesting. First, we're going to do an audit demo. So, what I wanted to focus on in this session was um, actually jumping into the audit process, kind of taking off those training wheels and stepping more into how would an actual audit go. I know we talk about a lot of theory, we talk about different vulnerabilities, we do some CTFs, and we've started reading reports, but now I think it's a great time to go ahead and practice and to kind of just have you all watch how I would approach an audit. So it's going to be a live audit. It's not going to focus on findings, but we're going to focus on my methodology. Next, we're going to talk about audit types. So that's just going to go through the different types of audits that can occur and kind of just talk about some of the different things you can do in Web3 security in terms of I guess, career opportunities, but specifically on the audit side. We talked about some of those things in the first session, but this will be specifically to different types of audits. We're going to do what we usually do, talk about a specific vulnerability, and this week is going to be an integer overflow and underflow. If any of you have completed the token assignment CTF for Ethernet, then you should have an intro to what an integer overflow and underflow is, but we'll have the ability kind of to deep dive into that and understand what that looks like. And then wrap it up with one of you all reviewing one of the CTFs you have done, maybe go through some questions that you had. But ultimately, we want one of you all to showcase how you solve the problem. All right. So before we begin, any questions on today's topics? I gotta go back to Discord to make sure.
I'm good.
Cool, cool. And this next part is meant to be really interactive. So, you don't be afraid to come off mute. It'll be me just kind of going through the code and we'll work through some of the stuff together. So that's the point of this. So, like I said, what we're gonna do is an audit demo. I want to try to keep it to an hour to kind of be like take up this first chunk of the session. Um, but this is really going to be the main focus today. So what I wanted to really cover is a few of the critical pieces of an audit, at least from my perspective. Before I start an audit, the first thing I do is, excuse me, I review documentation, and that is literally one of the, I guess, critical parts of understanding code is kind of reading through the documentation that the developers have created to really understand what's that functionality of the code, what is it really doing, and that's how you really determine how you can break something. You have to understand it first, right? And the second part of that is, or at least the part of the audit is doing the actual code review. So there's a little tips and tricks that I'll show you as I kind of go through this code, and you'll see my style of things. It's not a definitely not a one size fits all type of approach, but it's how I review code and how I audit, um, and so yeah, you'll be able to kind of take what you want from my code review. And then lastly, I'll show you how to do a simple audit report. It won't be a fully like PDF copy of one, but at least what I want to show is what do you need to do to communicate how your finding was able to actually break something, or how your finding showed that there was a vulnerability in the code. That's really what we want to get to. So that's what this first hour is going to be about. And I chose rabbit hole contest because I just saw someone post on Twitter about it. It had some interesting um, things revolving around this protocol, and it was something that I haven't audited before or really looked at. I think I've looked at the findings, but I have not actually like actually looked through the code. So this will be a good one because I'd be coming in with a completely fresh mind, and you'll see how I think through stuff. So I'll kind of just be talking about what I'm thinking at the moment, and what I see in this approach. So let's go ahead and jump in. And you all can honestly follow along with me to see exactly how I would do something from start to finish. Um, Actually, let's go to Code 4 Arena, and I can just go from here. So these are the findings. We don't need to look at that yet. Let's go to overview. Okay. Okay, yeah, so this is the repository. So yeah, this is how I would get to the repository. And this is actually a good thing to do. I'm gonna start doing this myself, but a lot of people will go back and audit a protocol and then use the findings that have been found as like their study guide to see if they could find all those findings. So let's jump in. So usually what I do is first thing is I grab the code here. And I have a folder that's set up specifically for bounty hunting or a contest. Um, and so if we go into May, we don't have to like actually go in and see all those. But essentially what I do is clone it down. All right, 2023 rabbit hole. Okay, so this is the code here. Uh-oh. I should have checked if they even had this code up. Oh, they blocked it. Okay, no, they didn't. Okay, there you go. So that's one thing I do is first bring the code down. Some people are different. I know people who will literally just audit via GitHub, and that's perfectly fine. But for me, I need some tools. I need to be able to work with the code actually. Um, Another thing I do when I first start an audit is I have my own notes template that I start off with. So um, what does that look like? I think I have it on Finder. Okay, so let's take this notes template, throw it into this. Oops. Okay, so we're good there. And so let me show you what my notes template looks like. Request. All right, this is everything. All right, so I have my notes separated into a few different areas. I have confirmed, which is basically the findings that I feel like are correct. I have leads, which is whenever I'm drafting a finding where I feel like I have found something, I'll throw it in the lead section. I have a checklist, which is a really great repo of some standards that you would want to check for. This is great as a backstop. If you cannot find anything, then I start going through a checklist. Um, this is a typical security approach whenever you're doing anything related to pen testing. Um, you usually have something to fall back on that's going to check for at least the critical things. Um, I have issues, which is basically a template of uh, how you would draft your findings. So you have your title, you have your links to affected code, you want to have your impact, a potential proof of concept, some tools used, and then recommended mitigation steps. And this can look different depending on what kind of bounty you're doing or contest you're doing, but this is typically the approach. And then I have a README, which is where all of my notes go. So let's go ahead and jump into the first part, which is figuring out, okay, what is this protocol doing? Um, so what is this doing? How does it do it? Okay. All right, so let's go to rabbit hole and let's see if we have documentation. Rabbit hole protocol. Yeah, I think it's a lot going on. Okay. So they have, okay, how it works, FAQs. All right, so download a crypto wallet of your choice, start transacting on chain and collect tokens to build your own chain resume, increasing your chances of quest eligibility. Complete on-chain tasks across the crypto ecosystem and come back to Rabbit Hole to verify completion. All right. So that's one of the main things they're doing. Mint receipts, mint a quest receipt, and NFT representing proof of completion of the quest. Claim your reward using the quest receipt to claim your token reward. Can worth more than their capital investments. All right, so this is very interesting. A little different than what we typically see in the Web3 space. There's a lot of DeFi stuff going on right now, but I love the approach to different avenues like GameFi, and this is like a completely like a almost like a different type of bounty hunting protocol, but for various opportunities, whether I guess you're any job you want to take on. So um, let's look more into this. So quests are targeted earning opportunities in the lifeblood of Rabbit Hole. After you complete a quest, you can mint a receipt and claim a token reward. Where's a receipt? Receipts are NFTs that represent proof of completion for Rabbit Hole Rabbit Hole quest. Each receipt is unique to a specific quest. You can use the receipt to claim a reward for a quest, or you can transfer it to others. You can even use it as collateral, a loan, or some DeFi protocol. Interesting. How'd you become eligible? Different for every quest, so it's hard to guarantee what you might be eligible for certain quests. However, you more likely to be chosen for a quest if you transact often and have earned a large number of tokens. Tickets you unlock. Okay. How do I claim a reward? You can claim a reward for a quest by minting or owning a quest receipt that has not yet claimed a reward. Open up the Rebel app, navigate the quest. Okay. Interesting. This is really cool. So already a few things I'm thinking is, um, so I'm starting to identify. So in my head, this is what's happening. I'm already identifying what are some of the key functionalities, and then where could things be broken. So this is kind of like that think like an attacker mindset that we kind of talked about in some of the earlier sessions. But at this moment, so I'm thinking of, okay, so you have receipts that are NFTs. Um, what happens, or how is this functionality set up when you send these NFTs? Are there correct receivers on contracts? Do they check for this? Are they using safe transfers? What happens if you send a receipt and it gets rejected? Does that get frozen in the protocol? So I'm thinking about stuff like that. Um, can I somehow duplicate my quest? So let's say I have, excuse me, y'all. Let's say I have a quest that will earn me maybe $100 for something I do. Can I potentially somehow maybe use like a replay type of attack where I can just keep submitting the quest that I've already had and continuously make money? These are some of the things that's going through my head as I start to learn about a protocol and I read some of the documentation. So, so with that said, let's actually get rid of this. With that said, what I start doing when I read the documentation is I already start forming a simple like mental threat model. So attack vectors, can quest be duplicated and submitted to gain extra cash? Quests are represented as NFTs. Do they safely transfer? Unfrozen. If fail, transfer. So I just start building out these attack vectors, and we're not going to go through the whole process because remember I want to just focus on the actual methodology and not the not finding anything. That what we want to do here is kind of just show how does that flow look like. So I want to pause really quick because I covered a lot of how I do things. Do y'all have any questions at this point in time on this methodology and how I'm approaching the contest?
Yeah, this has been really helpful so far. Thank you. It's cool to see it from this perspective. You're doing it right now with a protocol that's been around for a little while and it's got good, some good documentation.
Mm-hmm.
There's plenty of times when the protocol is just trying to get an audit out and there's no documentation, or they're just young and they haven't had a lot of users yet. They don't have a lot written down.
Mm-hmm.
What do you do there? You just skip that part and go to your next piece of the puzzle. It's a little harder to do, or you just have longer conversations with the devs to try to answer these questions yourself.
That's a great question. So kind of almost kind of how I went here first. So it's crazy because my source of truth, and I didn't. It's crazy I did this and I didn't talk through it, but you notice I went straight to their Twitter. because most of the crypto space operates through Twitter, and so usually I'll go there first. So like, let's say they're a young team and they don't really have much documentation. They may have some posts about their protocol or what they're doing. They may have like one Medium article or one blog post out there that talks about it. And so first, if I can't find documentation, I do something called OSINT, which in the security community is open source intelligence, and is basically trying to use whatever tools you can to investigate, a person if they have done a hack or whatever it is. But except I use those techniques on a protocol. So I'll do interesting things like Twitter. I'll look up on GitHub and I'll just type in the protocol. Like I'll type in their protocol. Um, and I'll just see if there are interesting things that come up, any weird comments. Um, that's another area I'll do, and then mainly for Code for Arena, and I'll go to an example. For Code for Arena and Sherlock, you'll have the ability to speak with some of the devs. So, like, this is an active contest right here, and you can ask questions about like to the devs of what's happening, and they'll respond like, what is this number, what is it supposed to do, and they'll give you responses. And then I'll also DM them and just start asking specific questions if their documentation doesn't support it. So that's a great question. A lot of devs, they really don't focus a lot on documentation. So I just start doing a little bit of open source intelligence, really trying to research GitHub, Twitter, Medium blog articles, and then the next thing is if I can find who those developers are, I'll just start reaching out to them on Discord or Twitter to ask them some questions about their protocol.
Thank you. Cool.
Of course, of course. Any other questions on kind of that first process, how I investigate, how I kind of read through documentation, and then how I set up my notes?
So you do this as a preparation to the contest or after the contest starts?
Yes, yes. So that's a great question. So I do this in preparation for the contest. It's before the contest starts, it's a cool to get a jump, like a head start on everyone by just using open source intelligence to see what's already available. You may find that you can actually kind of start looking at their protocol and some of their code even before they release it on the contest page. So it's a great way to kind of get an edge on your auditing, on at least Code for Arena and Sherlock contest. If you can already kind of use some pre-prep time to work through what their code looks like, or at least how their architecture looks like. If you can't find code, you might be able to find some documentation on their architecture. And another thing that your question kind of brought up is that similar to a contest, this is how an audit would work. So like, let's say my firm has a client that needs an audit. This is exactly what I do before I even start setting up for the actual audit. I have about 2 or 3 days for a pre-audit or preparation for audit, and that's exactly what I'll do is grab documentation, build out some simple attack vectors without looking at the code, and then try to just have a better understanding of what's happening. Make sure I have any questions in here. Does that answer, Sadiq?
Yes, perfect. Thank you.
Of course, of course. All right, I think Little Don may have some questions. Okay. So, hey, Little Don, do you have any questions? I want to make sure. I didn't know if you're just in here and okay. He may just be on the screen. But we'll jump right back into it. Feel free to come off mute and let me know. I just have to switch back and forth to make sure no one typed a question in chat. So if y'all can help me out with that, that'd be perfect. All right, so we've kind of seen like that first. Let's go back to the slides. We've kind of seen, how do I start a code review? What does the prep look like? How does my notes structure look like? And so next we will jump into the code review. So we have some of this. Actually, let's bring this down here. Overview of the protocol. All right, so now when we look into the contracts, we can start getting a deeper understanding of what's happening. So we have contracts, we have some interfaces. I don't really look at interfaces off the bat because in my head, what I'm thinking at this current moment is this is not essentially like a critical functionality. I in my brain immediately want to go to the big fish items first to just kind of get an understanding around what's happening, and then I'll start picking off the low-hanging fruit. But I immediately want to go and look at what's the most important things in here. So this is test. I don't even touch things that say test, honestly, right off the bat. All right, ownable, upgradable. So that's interesting. Some new stuff for attack vectors is using upgradable contracts. What are the typical downfalls of upgradables, and how can I exploit? So, and I know we haven't talked too deep into upgradable stuff, but I'm going to talk about it briefly here. Upgradable contracts are very interesting because it's a different paradigm that you typically would see in most smart contracts. Most smart contracts are supposed to be immutable, but there are upgradable contracts where you can actually change those. And we won't go into the philosophy and like the theory of, is it good or bad for the ecosystem? But the key thing to know here is that with upgradables, there's a few things you have to look at. It's how state variables are managed. There's can the or are constructors use? Are there gaps? Are there storage gaps in base contracts? And has it been initialized? Is initialized gated? And I know some of you are probably looking at this as like, what is this about? If you haven't looked into vulnerabilities with upgradable contracts, but just have these, I guess, in mind for now, and maybe just kind of as you go along with me, take mental notes and actually drop these in here, and you can do some more research about it. I'm going to drop Open Zeppelin's upgradable documentation here. And they have a lot of I just read through these just recently, actually. They have a lot of information on, what are the typical downfalls. It talks about storage gaps. So let me drop that in here. Oh, we got a question. So what kind of findings are you looking for? Do you strictly focus on vulnerabilities? How you deal with gas optimization? Okay, so what kind of findings am I looking for? So typically I don't go in with the approach to have like, okay, I want specific findings. The reason I don't do that is because of how interesting ways of how our brain works. If we go in with, I guess, assumptions, and we go in with certain findings, it may limit how we actually view the code or how we analyze the code. So I like to go in with a blank state of mind and just say, hey, this is a DeFi protocol. I may know some of the top attack vectors, but I want to just read the code and then go from there. Some auditors may disagree with that approach, but that's just my way of doing things. I found that if I approach an audit with like assumptions or like specific findings, I typically will just focus on those, and it kind of limits like my view of how I want to find other interesting and unique attack vectors. The next one is, do you strictly focus on vulnerabilities? Um, I do not. I actually don't. So in contest, they focus on vulnerabilities, but whenever I work with different clients, they like to hear other things like user experience related stuff or just interesting vector like they're not attack vectors, but interesting things in the report or in the code that may be good for the developers. So for instance, like spelling errors, um, duplication of code, dead code. I like to have that included as well in private audit reports or when I work with my security firm. But for contests, I do specifically focus on vulnerabilities because that's just what they want. And then how do you deal with gas optimization? Um, we'll talk through that in a little bit in this one. I'll touch on that in a bit, but honestly, this is a great question because honestly, right now I don't really focus on too much gas optimization. I've seen where Code for Arena has like bot races and they have the ability to find a good chunk of the gas optimizations already within the first hour. And so to be honest, I think in the future, gas optimizations are going to be something that's going to be automated. So what I do now is I focus specifically on like medium and high vulnerability findings. And if I find lows, I'll throw those in there. But um, to be honest, I don't focus on too much gas optimization at the moment. But if a client asks for it, then that's something that I'll work on. But for Code for Arena and Sherlock, I don't really focus too much on gas optimization. Um, Probably something other auditors would say not to do, but that's just my approach. Is that okay? I think that answers. Um, and that's
Yeah, that was clear. Thank you.
no problem, no problem. So that's good because now that kind of helped me lead into this next part, which is what I was kind of just about to start touching on was I don't really focus on too much of the low end hanging fruit. I kind of just go like straight into the deep end and want to figure out what is the critical functionality. So what I like to do is just search for keywords like withdraw. Um, that's something that's major is when you start withdrawing things from a contract. Yep, withdraw remaining tokens. That's where some key things are going to happen. Um, so now you're getting into the first stage of how I audit. Um, the reason I have this little audit tags, I have something called, uh, is it auditor? Yeah, okay. So it's called Solidity Visual Developer. This is an amazing extension. Um, it helps me in performing a lot of the audit tasks that I'm doing. It allows me to do stuff like place these bookmarks into the code, and then I can go back and find, what I typed up, whether I found an issue, whether it was informational, um, and what it will do is it'll throw them all in this bookmark page, so you can see all of your audit tags. So for you all, you may want to just do comments, but for me, I really love this feature from this extension because I can read through the code and place notes. Um, so I'm gonna just show you how I do that first. I don't want to dive too deep into that extension, but let's kind of read through this. So we have ownable, upgradable. So this is dealing with upgrading something. We have quest. I'm assuming it's the actual quest. We have quest factory, which typically in Solidity, any factory is just going to create another contract that does a few things. We have rabbit hole receipt, which is it looks like that the receipt that shows I guess if you've been paid or we have to go back to the docs, but then we have receipt render. That looks interesting as well. But it looks like everything is circled around this quest. And whenever I find let's see, where's deposit? Okay, there's no deposit function. Anything around withdrawal, I kind of just start looking at that contract first. So, quest, this contract's ERC20 quest contract. There's a quest that is redeemable for ERC20 tokens. Okay, so this is interesting. They're using safe ERC20. So we can kind of already know that transfers, approvals, etc. are likely going to be safe. Um, and looks like they're using, where's safe ERC? Okay. So real quick, y'all. I need to do in order to see a lot of these contracts, you have to install some things. So it looks like they're using hard hat. Actually, let me do install, and hard hat may come with it. So I don't know if you all know this already, but what's happening? And I'm not gonna go through this stuff if I can't debug it, but tree, yep. Okay, is it yarn? All right. So depending on the protocol, you may have to use yarn or npm. I'm not gonna go too deep into this because I may have to start debugging stuff, and I don't want to spend our time focusing on that. But okay, yeah, I'm not gonna really too much focus on that. But usually when you install everything, it'll come with all the dependencies. Yep, it's brought in some dependencies. So that way you'll be able to kind of take a look at a lot of the contracts that they're using. And then also you'll be able to maybe test some things. So for this, I don't know if this is going to work. Yeah. That's where, yeah. So, yeah, I'm not going to go too much to debugging that right now, but usually what I do is I will install everything and try to run tests. I'll also use that to be able to kind of look at some of the dependencies they're using, but right now we're not going to dive too deep into that. So using safe ERC20, and even if we can't, like let's say you're on GitHub or something and you can't install everything, you can typically go see these contracts already because these are the dependencies they're using. So don't be worried if like you're newer to this and you're trying to install stuff and you're debugging, you're just like, I don't know what to do. Most of these dependencies can be found. These are public libraries. So yeah, if it's Open Zeppelin, you can go look at those online and still be able to review the code to understand what's going on. So they're using safe ERC20, which has safe transfer from. Yeah, that's a good thing because a lot of the transfer mechanisms is where some vulnerabilities can be found. So that's something I would note. I would also note what this has withdrawn. Interesting. Dive deeper into this. Okay, so we have constructor, disable initializers. This is a best practice. This is good that they're doing this. Initialize. There's a lot of stuff that they have with this. And another cool thing about this extension is it will let you know when there's a potential issues. Block timestamp can be an issue in certain cases, but as long as you don't use it for things like a source of randomness, you don't use timestamps that are close together. Reason for that is because of miners can reorganize transactions, or I won't say miners, but things can be, yeah, I guess you can still say miners, but transactions can be reorganized even with proof of stake. So that's something to look into. but it doesn't look like they're using this as randomness. They're actually using it for time. Total transfer amount. Okay, so there's a queue. Does not mean that this is live. It also requires that the start time has passed. So with a queue, I like to know if there's can be duplicates in that queue, but it looks like this is something that's going to be overridden and only the owner can modify. So they're using only owner modifiers. All right, so, and again, we're not going to focus on finding, but I just want to show you all how I think through this. So, so since they're using modifiers, I typically like to kind of take a look at where those are. And I won't say I ignore these for now, but I don't look too deep into these because this is essentially a good practice for access control. Anything that's like external and let's see another one. Anything that's just like external and it doesn't have any modifiers on it, that's something to take a look at first because that's like anyone can call that transaction, anyone can make that transaction and start modifying things. But when you have different modifiers like only owner and things like that, that's good. That's honestly best practices of access control. So I'll look at it a little bit later. Cannot refund. So this deals with a refund. That's interesting. Let's look at some other things. Kind of just read from top to bottom. So we have pause, unpause. Another good thing I like, so this is what I would do. When things are paused, can a user lose money? Any unfair advantage be created? So this is more interesting for like DeFi protocols for liquidations. I don't know how this would work in this contest, but essentially, like if you have a DeFi protocol and you can pause contracts, if you pause the ability for users to pay something down, their positions could be liquidated. So you want to make sure that if things are paused, are you still allowing maybe the inflow of money, but just not the outflow? So that's something that I like to look at. And now because I know that from a DeFi standpoint, I will take that angle and kind of apply it to this Quest protocol and just look at, all right, so if I can pause a contract, let's say a quest is paused. Does that give a user any type of fair advantage to complete a quest, to make the money they should be? Can this be used in a malicious way? So that's kind of just what my brain is working through right now. And now that I say that, I would say pause functionality may prevent a user from claiming a quest they completed. And that could be a bug, right? Because if I've completed a quest and I've done some work, and next thing you know, the contract gets paused, that quest may time out, but I've completed it and I may not be able to like receive my money. That's actually would be interesting if this was a finding. Hey, if this wasn't a finding and it actually is a vulnerability, then I just gave y'all a freebie to go and submit this or whatever. But that's kind of what I'd be looking at whenever I'm auditing stuff like this. Okay, so let me check time where we're at. All right, we're good. Only at Quest active. So this is kind of the approach to how I look at things, what I type up in my notes, and then also when I start finding interesting things, I call them smellies. When I start finding interesting smellies, I start putting in like these attack vectors, what sounds right. And sometime later, I'll just go down this list and go and confirm. So an interesting concept when it comes to actually auditing something is learning how to focus on an attack thread. So a lot of people may just continuously keep reviewing, keep reading, but they don't really go and dive kind of deeper under the surface to look through a specific funnel. So after I have a few of these, and like let's take this pause functionality may prevent a user from claiming requests, for example. I will only focus on anywhere something is paused. I don't really look at the other code. I kind of just see, okay, where is paused at? And what happens when something's paused? What happens when something is not paused? Um, I'll take a look at all of the different code bases with it. So it looks like it's only in here. And I will specifically focus on making sure I can validate, making sure I can validate or invalidate this finding, and I can go to the next one. So that is the first piece, y'all. Let me make sure we're good. No taking building threat vectors. Okay. Any questions on that process right there, like building out those attack vectors and learning how to just focus on those? Yeah. Great. Yep. So you're already having that. Yeah. And this is a good exercise. If you all have things that you saw, definitely post them in the chat or just ask the question on it. So can anyone initialize? Good question. Initialize. So it looks like, yes, this is external, but because I just saw that there's a quest factory, my assumption is that while not only anyone could initialize, they really have it only set up to where this factory can create this quest. So it looks like there's like some protections in here. So like ownable initialize, access control initialize. So that already tells me that there's some more access control around how this is initialized. It may look like it's free, like anyone can do it, but essentially what it looks like is this factory initializes this quest, and then this initializer modifier right here makes sure that no one else can reinitialize this contract. So that's how I'm interpreting it right now, which is looking at it in a few minutes. Any other questions, y'all, on just that, on that piece, my process? Okay, I'll take silence as y'all are good.
Hey, so I do have a question. So I know some auditors like they start by auditing the contract with the least amount of line of code, and then they
Mm-hmm.
kind of work their way up because sometimes you can get burned out
Yep.
starting from like the biggest contract. What's your thought on that?
Yeah, no, that's a great one. So for me, that's actually really good. I probably should maybe try that approach. So for me, what I like to do is I just kind of it's kind of crazy. I kind of go with just what my brain feels best at the moment. So like let's say I have read through the documentation and there's some like one piece that really is interesting to me. And for me it was quest, right? So whenever I open up these contracts right here, and if I see something that was already something in the documentation that I was interested in, I'm instantly just going to go there and just kind of start reading from top to bottom. Um, Even if it's a very long piece, like a long, like say there's a lot of code, an interesting thing that I like to do that kind of makes it short is I will minimize the code functions, and it makes it less intimidating. So let's do this. Uh, right here. This is essentially what I like to do. And it makes it very, like, it really makes it clear for my brain to see, okay, so there is something being transferred, there's a queue, there's pausing, there's claims, um, and it's like I guess my way of shortening the lines of code and just kind of taking a bird's eye view look at it. So I guess that's my answer to it is I don't typically take that approach. I just go with what seems the most interesting to me, and I just start from reading that. Does that help?
Yeah, that was. Thank you.
Okay, no problem. All right, so as a noob, I begin with the test folder. I want to see the setup. Then I'm diving right into the what's being called. I will get familiar with the docs from now on. Yeah, no. So that's a great point. So I know I did say that I skip over the test. Um, so I honestly use that approach as well. So here's my thought process. I first read the contracts as or my source of truth is really a lot of the contracts first because this is where the code is being developed. This is where that functionality is happening. The next thing I do love to do as well is go through those tests and you can kind of see the flow of the code. It'll tell you like this right here. Usually the function names will kind of tell you what's happening. So when end time is before start time, setting public variables, um, talking about participants, and it really helps read the code. But the thing I like to do is run these tests and make sure they're valid at times because developers may not even finish the test and it may just pass, but that may not be the case that it's actually doing what it's supposed to be doing. So yeah, that's a great point. Reading through the test is a really great way to try to understand the code and reason about what's happening. Okay, so I think we've covered a good bit. Or actually, any more questions before I continue? Okay. All right. So um, now let's talk a little bit about the how do you gather your findings? The reason why this is a very important part is that you may be someone who's great technically and can find bugs, the whole nine, but if you cannot communicate these things to the developers and the judges, or an audit firm, or not your audit firm, but your clients, those findings may not be worth much because they won't be able to understand what's happening. They won't understand how to fix what is the problem or what's the vulnerability. So I want to spend some time, a good bit of time actually, focusing on report writing. So let's go to our issues. Where's my notes template? Okay. So, all right, so let's take a look at this first thing. When we look at title, when we look at all of this, this can look very different for everyone. And if you have read through some reports, you can you can see where some findings may explain something really great and some findings may be a little confusing. Some of that may be technical understanding, but also some of that could just be the person that wrote the finding understood the problem very well, but they couldn't really express or communicate how that looked. So for the title, make sure the title is descriptive. And it needs to be descriptive as possible, right? Because if you have this title essentially is the first thing that someone will see. And having something like just unchecked value versus unchecked transfer function leads to loss of funds. That's very different, right? Unchecked value says has a story, but this has an even greater story that will allow someone to instantly look at your title and know what this finding is going to explain. So that's the key thing for the title is titles need to be Very descriptive.
So let's say you and someone else have the same findings, but you're a little more descriptive.
Mm-hmm.
That'll like help you out, right?
That's correct. That is exactly correct. So on a lot of the contests, you can get duplicates, but if you have the best selected finding, if it was like the most descriptive, if it was really great, then you'll get awarded more points and more money just because your finding was more descriptive than someone else. So that's how you can have an edge on people who may be more technical, but if you just are really descriptive and can explain something very well, you'll have your findings selected over someone else.
That's cool.
Yeah, you have another question?
No, that was
Okay.
clear.
Okay.
Hey, I have a request.
Hmm.
Is it possible to share the template that you are using?
Yeah, I'll share this. What I'll do is I will have um let me put yeah, actually that's a good question. Let me take a note to put this on our GitHub, and you all can clone it down and use it whenever you're auditing, if that would be helpful.
Yeah, thanks.
No problem. Okay. So, let me make sure the stream is good. All right. So, really quick. All right. So where were we at? Links to affected code. I think so. I don't know if everyone knows this, but I think it's fair. Okay. No problem, y'all. I understand if y'all have to drop. Yeah, I'll have this recorded so you can come back and see. So links to affected code. This one is simple. So when you go into like a GitHub repository, we're just going to take something random. Let's go to here. What you do is you just copy permalink, and that's going to tell you like where this issue is in the code. If you want to select a chunk, you have this piece selected. You hold shift, the shift key, and then you click the line number, copy permalink, and there you go. You can throw that in here. And anytime someone clicks this, it'll take them directly to that code snippet of whatever they're finding. When I first started auditing these things and trying to participate in contests, I was like, how the heck were people doing this? And so that's how you do it. With an audit firm, it may look a little bit different. Typically, it will look like this, which is code blocks and markdown. And then you copy the lines of code and throw that in there, and that will show up. If we open a preview of this, this is what it will look like on like after you view the markdown file. So those are two ways you can show links to affected code. I like to do the actual links. I don't really like to do this version if I'm doing contest. If I'm working with my firm, then I do this version. Okay, so next is impact. Same note, make sure the impact is descriptive and it actually points out a problem, right? If this unchecked value, like let's take this for example, unchecked transfer function leads to loss of funds. Well, what's the impact? Users can lose funds during a failed transfer. So that's telling the impact. You may want to talk a little bit more about that. But if you just put in the impact like, developers failed to check a value, and that could be bad, and that's bad. That's very different from losing funds, right? Excuse me. So kind of the same thing. Just make sure you're very descriptive. Make sure when you talk about the impact, you're actually focusing on that problem. Next is a proof of concept. So we're not going to go dive too deep into this. But what I typically like to do for proof of concepts is I like to do a visual map of what this vulnerability looks like. So if we're talking about unchecked transfer function leads to loss of funds, we can say Alice attempts to transfer USDT. USDT doesn't revert on failure. So if this transfer fails, $5 is lost. Alice can't, or we might say, state variables, value is never updated, right? So that's kind of how I'll do a proof of concept, is I'll visually walk through like a certain call. I'll make sure I mention variables. I may say in a specific function. So in the transfer claim function, right? So make sure you're descriptive of how that works. Another way you can do a proof of concept is you can actually go and write a test yourself, right? And you can copy and paste that test of the vulnerability. So like, let's say we created one here. And we can say proof of concept, failure to transfer. And let's say I write this code and I run it and it shows a vulnerability. You can throw this as well in the proof of concept version. And you might write a little note to say, add this file or add this test to the Quest Factory spec.ts file and run it, right? That's a proof of concept. Tools used. You can say what tools you use. I usually always put manual review. Let's say you're good at writing, formal verification. You're good at using certain static analyzers. You may want to say like I use Slither or I used Hard Hat or Foundry, whatever you want to do. But typically I just put manual review. And then again, recommended mitigation steps. Be as descriptive as possible. Because if you make a recommendation that is not going to help someone, what is that finding for? Like, yes, you may have identified a vulnerability, but we want to help developers fix those vulnerabilities. So try your best to see, what are the ways to fix it, test it, make sure your recommendation is sound, because if your vulnerability is correct but your recommendation is wrong, that may affect if your vulnerability gets counted as valid because your recommendation was completely wrong. So make sure it's descriptive. Make sure you explain how to actually fix it, and try to at least identify that it works, whether you're testing it or whether you've seen someone else have a similar finding and the recommendation is closely aligned. Let me go back to Discord. Any questions on that finding piece, making sure you're drafting up findings? How does that report look?
I initially had that doubt with the permalink, but yeah, I think you explained that. So thanks for that.
Okay, perfect. And so that's how a finding looks. Now, in terms of report writing, I did want to slowly touch on this because while this is not typically for a report, you don't have to generate that for contest. But in case any of you are interested in, joining an audit firm or becoming an auditor with a company, you will typically have to know how to draft a report or how to write up a report. They will have most of the tools needed to actually they may have like a certain format of how they write it, but what they typically all follow a similar format. And this comes from the Web2 security world of pen testing. And it looks a little bit like this. I'm just going to give a high level overview of how it looks. So you usually have like your title page. Next, you usually have a summary. This contains, the summary contains the scope of the audit, how long the audit was performed, and it also contains some details about the protocol. That's usually the summary page. The scope is usually going to be the commit hash. So you see this right here. I think this is the commit hash. Another way I'll look at it is this. I do get branch. Is that what it is? Oh wait, no. I don't know why I'm blanking out on the okay. No, I'm actually blanking out on how I got the how I get the branch. Uh, okay,
I think it's git br hyphen list.
list.
Yeah.
All right, let's see. That wasn't it. Git command for branch hash. I don't, and this is what happens. I'll end up going down a rabbit hole, but um, yeah, basically, there's a git command where you can view a lot of the status about the branch. I have to remember the command, but um, essentially that's what I will do to get this to get the commit hash. Um, and so yeah, it's a cool way to git log. That's what it is. Okay, so yeah, essentially you can look at the commit hash, the author, the date, and Brian, this helps to answer a question from earlier. So like if I get a some code, I'll go look at this log and see like, hey, what was their their emails, the names maybe that they used. Um, so yeah, it's a cool way to kind of do some research on it. But in a typical audit, I'll take this commit hash, and that goes into the scope of, you know, what was that commit hash you reviewed? Because if there's a hack or something happens, you want to make sure that you can specify whether you did review that code or whether you didn't. So that's a very important part of the audit process at a firm. Next, you may have a findings summary, which is essentially going to be the title portion. It's just going to be this, like all the way down, listing all the different findings. That's why this is important. The title is important because it really helps to identify what that finding is and maybe what it's talking about. So that way, if they see one that's very interesting to them or that's really critical or high, they can instantly go to it. And then lastly is you might typically see a methodologies page. We won't jump too deep into this, but some of what is adopted for Web3 security is the OWASP standards. So it may be something like a mix of NIST and OWASP. Combined, and we don't really have to cover that too much right now. That'll be something that's specific to the audit firm you end up joining. But I just wanted to at least touch on how does a report look? What is that high level flow of writing a report? But we're not going to go too deep into that because we just want to focus right now on findings and drafting those up so that if you were to join a contest, you can kind of know how to start participating. Any questions on that side, the report side? Okay. Let's go ahead and move on. So, okay, so I think we have until 1, so we're going to blow through these next parts of the presentation because we really did the bulk of what I want to go through, which was how do you perform an audit? What does that look like? What does the flow look like? I know a lot of people are intimidated by these contests and don't really know how to do it or how to set it up, but that is literally my flow and how I develop my findings, how I find them, the whole process. I gave you all the all the alpha for that. So